studio microphone. She looked at me with a seriousness that cut through all the noise of the set. "This stays off camera," she whispered. I should have walked away, but how do you forget someone who never leaves your mind? The first day I saw her, I wasn't supposed to notice her the way I did. She was the actress, 43, renowned, the kind of woman whose face you see on posters and in interviews, but whose presence in person feels impossibly larger, warmer, more arresting. I was just a small part of the crew, a quiet name on a long list of assistants, slipping in and out of the background. And yet, the moment she walked onto the set, it was as if the entire room took a breath. The set was alive with noise, technicians calling to one another, cameras rolling into position, stage lights warming the air until the room felt heavy. And then there was her. Dressed simply for the scene, in a flowing gown the color of deep wine, she moved with a calm steadiness that seemed immune to the chaos around her. Even as others swirled in motion, she walked with quiet grace, every step considered, unhurried. I pretended to stay busy, adjusting cables and checking notes, but I kept stealing glances. Up close, she was nothing like the glossy magazine images. She was better, lines of life etched softly around her eyes, a kind of strength that only comes from experience. She wasn't trying to be admired, she simply was. At one point, she passed close to me, so near I could hear the faint rustle of fabric as her gown brushed against itself. A subtle perfume lingered in the air, something delicate, almost floral, but understated, like she had chosen it to be noticed only by those standing near. For a second, I felt as though the noise of the set fell away. And then, unexpectedly, she looked at me. Not in the way a star might glance over nameless crew, but as if she'd caught me mid-thought. Her eyes lingered, calm but curious, and before I could look away, she smiled. It wasn't the polished smile she gave the director or the cameras. This one felt smaller, private, like a secret she was letting me hold for a moment. I swallowed down the rush in my chest and turned back to my clipboard, pretending to check notes. But the truth was, that smile stayed with me long after she had moved on. I told myself it was nothing, that I was imagining meaning where there was none. After all, she was a woman whose life existed in spotlights, while I lived in shadows, unnoticed. Still, there was something undeniable in the way she had looked at me. A recognition, or maybe just curiosity. Whatever it was, it struck a chord I couldn't ignore. By the time the first scene was ready to roll, I had forced myself back into the rhythm of my work. But a part of me kept replaying that look, that smile, the faint trace of her presence as she passed by. And though I said nothing, I knew one thing for certain: this wasn't the kind of meeting you forget. The second time I found myself close to her, it wasn't planned. The set had slowed down for a reset, cameras cooling, stagehands rearranging props. Everyone scattered into their own corners, checking phones, grabbing water, whispering about schedules. I sat near the edge of the room, scribbling down notes I barely understood, just trying to look occupied. Then she appeared, as if drawn by the same need for quiet. Without asking, she lowered herself into the chair beside me. The air seemed to shift, like the buzz of the room faded just enough for me to hear the soft sigh as she leaned back. She reached up, unclasping the heavy earrings that had been part of her costume. They dangled from her fingers before she set them gently on the table between us. I didn't move, afraid that if I acknowledged her, the spell would break. But she glanced sideways, catching my hesitation. "They're heavier than they look," she said softly, almost to herself. Her voice carried a low warmth, each word measured, as though she'd learned the value of speaking only when she meant something. I managed a nod, my throat dry. "I can hold them, if you'd like." She smiled faintly, placing them in my open palm. For a brief second, her fingertips brushed against my skin, cool and delicate, but steady, as though she had no fear of closeness. The earrings themselves weighed less than I expected, but the sensation of her touch stayed heavy, lodged in my chest. For a while, she didn't say anything else. She simply sat there, her posture relaxing, her gaze drifting across the room. I could see the tiniest shift in her expression, as though the practiced, untouchable face she wore for everyone else was loosening. Then, without turning to me, she said, "You know, people think this life is glamorous. The lights, the applause, the attention. But there are days it feels like the loneliest job in the world." Her words caught me off guard. I hadn't expected her to open herself to me, someone she barely knew, someone invisible on the edge of her spotlight. I wanted to ask more, to tell her I understood, even if only a little. But before I could, she blinked and let out a quiet laugh, as if suddenly aware of how much she'd revealed. "Forget I said that," she murmured, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "It's not something I usually share." I studied her for a moment, the way her confidence slipped just enough to show something fragile underneath. And in that flicker, she didn't seem like the actress anymore. She seemed like a woman, real, weary, but graceful in her honesty. I placed the earrings back in her hand, careful to meet her eyes this time. "Some secrets are safe with me." Her fingers lingered just a second too long as she took them back. Her lips curved into a smile, softer than before. Then, with the ease of someone who had mastered the art of retreat, she stood and walked away, once again cloaked in her unshakable poise. But for me, that moment stayed. Not the earrings, not the brief exchange of words, but the truth that beneath her strength lived a quiet loneliness. And for reasons I couldn't explain, I wanted to be the one to understand it was supposed to be an ordinary rehearsal. The director wanted a smoother delivery for one of the film's most delicate scenes, an exchange heavy with longing, where the actress's character confesses a hidden love. The cameras weren't rolling yet, only a handful of us were present, and I'd been asked to hold the spare script, ready to cue lines if needed. She stood at the center of the set, already in character, her eyes lowered, her breath steadying. Even stripped of the lights and the full production, she radiated something that made the room still. When she lifted her gaze, it felt like her character's heartbreak filled the air. "Come closer," the director motioned to me. "Help her with the blocking. Just stand in, so she has someone to focus on." My stomach tightened. I wasn't an actor. I wasn't supposed to be anywhere near her like that. But I obeyed, clutching the script in clammy hands, and stepped toward her. She gave me the briefest glance, a mixture of amusement and reassurance, as if to say, "Relax. I won't bite." We began. She moved gracefully through her lines, her voice trembling with carefully crafted vulnerability. My role was simple: stand where the other actor would, keep my eyes steady, let her practice. But the truth was, the longer I looked at her, the harder it became to remember this was pretend. At one point, my job required me to adjust the small mic clipped beneath the edge of her blouse. The wire had slipped slightly out of place, and the sound engineer motioned for me to fix it. My hands shook as I reached forward, brushing the side of her neck. Her skin was softer than I expected, warm against my fingertips. For a split second, her breath caught, not loudly, not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for me to feel the shift between us. When she delivered her next line, her voice carried a weight I hadn't heard before, as though the words weren't just for rehearsal anymore. Her eyes locked with mine, refusing to let me look away. I forgot the script, forgot the director's presence, forgot the fact that this was all supposed to be performance. The line ended, and silence lingered longer than it should have. She tilted her head slightly, her lips curving in the faintest, teasing smile. Her voice dropped to a whisper that only I could hear. "Don't let the director see how nervous you make me look." My chest tightened. Was she joking? Testing me? Or was there something real woven between those words? I forced myself to step back, handing over the script like it was a shield. She accepted it, her fingers grazing mine, her expression unreadable. Then, as the director called for another take, she returned effortlessly to her role, every trace of that private moment erased from her face. But for me, it was different. I couldn't erase it. I couldn't separate the actress from the woman anymore. And for the first time, I realized the line between performance and truth was blurring, and I wasn't sure if I wanted it to stay clear. The rain started just as the morning shoot wrapped. Heavy drops pelted the lot outside, drumming on trailers, pooling in shallow puddles, blurring the world beyond the set into silver streaks. Production halted, schedules shifted. Everyone scattered, to cars, to corners, to phones, waiting for the storm to ease. I hadn't expected to see her again so soon. I was standing beneath the awning, trying to stay dry, when her voice called softly behind me. "Come inside. You'll be drenched out here." I turned. She was holding the door of her trailer open, the faintest smile curving her lips. For a moment, I hesitated, knowing how it might look if anyone saw me go in. But the rain was relentless, and more than that, her invitation felt like a door to something I didn't want to refuse. Inside, the trailer was small but warm, lit by a single lamp that cast a golden glow. It smelled faintly of tea and makeup powder, but beneath it all was something softer. Her. She had already slipped out of costume, now dressed simply in a loose sweater and jeans, her hair unpinned, falling in natural waves around her shoulders. For the first time, she looked less like the actress everyone admired and more like the woman she really was. "Sit," she said, motioning toward the small couch. She busied herself with the kettle on the counter, pouring steaming water into 2 mugs. The rain outside grew heavier, muffling the world, leaving only the sound of its rhythm against the roof and the faint clink of porcelain as she stirred in sugar. When she handed me a cup, her fingers brushed mine, warm against the heat of the mug. She sat beside me, close enough that our shoulders touched lightly. Neither of us moved away. For a while, we talked about nothing, weather, schedules, the unpredictability of film sets. But somewhere between laughter and silence, the air shifted. She leaned back, her head tilting slightly toward mine, her laughter trailing into a breath that lingered. "You know," she said softly, looking at the steam rising from her cup, "I almost forgot what it feels like to just sit with someone, without having to perform." Her words landed deep. I didn't know how to respond, so I simply nodded, letting the quiet stretch. My hand rested on my knee, and then, without thinking, she placed hers on top of it. It wasn't deliberate, not bold, just a gentle resting, like it had happened naturally. Her touch was light, but my pulse raced at the warmth of her palm through the fabric of my jeans. We stayed like that, sipping tea, listening to the rain. The silence wasn't empty, it was full, charged, as if both of us understood the weight of the moment. Eventually, she drew her hand back, clearing her throat softly, returning to her mug. But her eyes found mine again, softer now, unguarded. The storm outside showed no sign of stopping. And in the stillness of her trailer, with the rain as our cover, I realized something. What we shared in these stolen moments felt more real than anything in front of the cameras ever could. The day after the storm, the set felt strangely heavier, as though the sky itself had pressed its weight down onto us. Everything ran later than scheduled, the director barking out instructions, tempers fraying in the heat of the lights. But none of that mattered to me, not compared to the change I felt in her. She avoided me. Not obviously. Not in a way anyone else would notice. She still smiled politely when I passed her notes, still thanked me when I handed her a prop, still performed with that flawless grace the world expected of her. But I knew. Her eyes slid past mine too quickly, her voice too measured, her steps carrying her away before I could speak. By the end of the day, the ache of it became unbearable. When she finally slipped behind the heavy black curtains at the back of the stage, I followed. The world outside was still buzzing with crew and equipment, but back there it was quiet, shadows stretching high against the rafters. She turned when she heard my footsteps, surprise flashing across her face, followed quickly by something else, something closer to sorrow. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "Why are you pushing me away?" The words left me before I could stop them. My voice was low, urgent, not accusing but raw. Her arms folded across her chest, not in anger but in defense. "Because this, whatever it is, it's too complicated." I stepped closer, the air between us charged with everything unspoken. "Complicated doesn't mean impossible. You told me once how lonely this all feels. You let me see you, not the actress, not the performance, you. And I can't just forget that." For a moment, her composure wavered. Her eyes softened, her lips parting as though she wanted to answer, but then she looked away. Do you have any idea what it would mean if people saw us like this? If they knew? Her words were laced with fear, but also something deeper, longing. I could hear it in the break of her voice, feel it in the way her hands trembled ever so slightly at her sides. I reached out slowly, giving her space to step back if she wanted. My fingers brushed against hers, and for a heartbeat she didn't move. But then, like it pained her, she pulled her hand away. The loss was immediate, like a door closing between us. Her voice steadied, though her eyes betrayed her. You're young. You'll move on from this. But I can't afford mistakes. I swallowed hard, fighting the weight pressing against my chest. You're not a mistake, I said, the words quiet but certain. Her eyes flickered, shimmering in the dim light, as though she wanted to believe me. But instead she turned, gathering herself, her back now to me. And just like that, the curtain between us felt thicker than ever. As I left, the sound of the bustling crew returned, but it all felt muted, distant. The only sound that stayed with me was the echo of her words, too complicated, and the memory of her hand slipping out of mine, as if even letting go had broken something inside her. The last day of filming arrived with an air of finality that clung to everything, the laughter of the crew, the rushed goodbyes, the applause that rang hollow once the director called, "That's a wrap." People celebrated, shaking hands, exchanging promises to stay in touch. But underneath the noise, I felt a quiet ache. I knew that if I let the moment slip, if I walked away without seeing her one last time, I'd regret it. She was nowhere near the crowd. While others lingered in the spotlight of their own triumphs, she had disappeared into the quieter corners of the set. It took me a while to find her, backstage, where the lights no longer reached. She stood alone, her costume already changed for the last time, her hair pinned neatly, but her expression far away, as though she were somewhere I couldn't see. When she noticed me, her eyes widened slightly, then softened. She didn't move, didn't call me closer, but she didn't turn away either. I took the risk, stepping into the quiet with her. For a moment neither of us spoke. The muffled hum of voices carried from outside, but here it was still, the air thick with the weight of unspoken things. Finally, she broke the silence. It's over now. The cameras are finished. Everyone goes back to their lives. Her voice was calm, but her fingers twisted lightly against one another, betraying the storm beneath. I swallowed, my chest tightening. And what about us? Her breath caught, just faintly. She lowered her gaze. Us? You told me once this stays off camera, I said softly. I can live with that. But don't ask me to erase it. Don't ask me to forget you. She looked up then, her eyes shining in the dim light. For a long second, she simply studied me, as though deciding whether to believe the steadiness in my words. And then she stepped forward. Her arms slid around my shoulders, tentative at first, then firmer, as though she had finally allowed herself to stop holding back. I felt the warmth of her cheek press against my chest, the rhythm of her breath syncing with mine. My arms came around her instinctively, and in that embrace, the noise of the world fell away. This, she whispered, her voice muffled against me. This can never belong to anyone else. It doesn't need cameras. It doesn't need approval. Her arms tightened just slightly, as if sealing the truth between us. It's ours. Off camera, always ours. I closed my eyes, breathing her in, the faint trace of perfume, the softness of her hair brushing my jaw, the steady beat of her heart against my ribs. In that moment, it didn't matter that she was older, that the world might never understand, that we would have to keep it hidden. What mattered was the quiet certainty that she wanted this as much as I did. When she finally pulled back, she didn't let go completely. Her hands lingered against my chest, her eyes still locked on mine. And in the glow of that hidden corner, I saw it, the vulnerability, the desire, and above all, the choice. The world outside would see her as an actress, untouchable and admired. But here, in the silence we had carved for ourselves, she was simply a woman. And she was mine, as much as I was hers. No cameras. No scripts. Just us. 18.